A millionaire came to an orphanage to attend a concert of the children there. Suddenly, he was stunned to see a face on the stage. It seemed to be... Adam had barely stepped inside the dimly lit auditorium when his breath caught in his throat. Among the sea of children fidgeting on the makeshift stage, a girl, small, delicate, stood near the center. His body tensed. The air thinned. She wasn't just another child in the choir. There was something about her, something that tightened his chest in a way he hadn't felt in years. The girl, no older than 10, lifted her chin slightly as the first note of the song hummed through the old speakers. Her dark lashes flickered as she focused on something distant, something only she could see. Then, the way she tilted her head, just slightly, almost imperceptibly, sent a wave of nausea rolling through him. Helen used to do that. Adam exhaled slowly, his heartbeat now a discordant rhythm against the soft melody filling the room. He forced himself to look away, but the pull was relentless. His eyes found her again. The delicate curve of her jaw, the faint dimple that flickered when she took a breath between notes, the slight tension in her brows as she concentrated. It was all painfully familiar. Number, it's impossible. His fingers curled into a fist, nails biting into his palm. He was being ridiculous. His mind, trained to rationalize, to break things down into facts, was playing tricks on him. He'd seen resemblances before, fleeting glimpses of Helen's smile in strangers on the street, echoes of Anne's laugh in a passing child. It never meant anything. It was never real. But then the song ended, and the girl turned her face fully toward the crowd. Adam gripped the edge of the nearest chair. It was Helen. No, not Helen, of course, but a living, breathing image of her. A hollow ache spread through his ribs as the audience clapped, their polite applause masking the storm raging inside him. The children on stage giggled and whispered to one another, stepping down in neat rows, eager to return to their seats. The girl, Doris, his mind whispered, though he had no reason to believe that was her name, moved more slowly. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, then looked up at one of the caretakers waiting near the side of the stage. Her lips moved, but Adam couldn't hear what she said. The hall was still thick with conversation, the soft clinking of wine glasses from the small reception area near the entrance. A few guests exchanged pleasantries with the orphanage staff, discussing the evening's program, but Adam weaved through them with single-minded focus. Near the door, a woman in a navy blouse was organizing donation envelopes at a table. Sandra, the orphanage director. He had met her briefly upon arrival, her handshake firm but warm. "Excuse me," Adam said, his voice even and controlled. "The girl in the choir, second row. Dark hair, blue dress. Who is she?" Sandra looked up, surprised by the urgency in his tone. She followed his gaze toward the now empty stage before offering a polite, practiced smile. "That would be Doris," she said. "She's been here since she was a baby." Adam's breath hitched slightly. "Since she was a baby?" Sandra nodded, flipping open a well-worn registry book beside her. "She was brought to us when she was just over a year old. A woman named Susan dropped her off, but we were never able to track down any biological family." She ran her finger along the faded ink entries before glancing up. "Is there a particular reason you're asking?" Adam hesitated for half a second too long. "She reminded me of someone," he said finally, his voice betraying nothing. Sandra didn't press further. Instead, she turned the book toward him, tilting it slightly so he could see the entry. "Doris. Arrived 9 years ago. Guardian. Susan. No further records available." His eyes locked on the name. His mind reeled, but his expression remained unreadable. Sandra closed the book gently. "She's a lovely child. Quiet, but thoughtful. She doesn't usually seek out visitors, though. Most of our children long for adoption, but Doris, she never asks." Adam forced himself to breathe evenly. His hands, hidden in the pockets of his coat, curled into fists. A decade ago, he had buried his wife. He had grieved a daughter whose body was never found. And now, standing in a quiet orphanage on the outskirts of the city, he was staring down at a name in a registry that shouldn't mean anything, but did. Something inside him shifted. He wasn't done here. Not yet. The city was restless. Night stretched over the skyline, a hazy blend of neon reflections on wet pavement, headlights cutting through the mist like wandering ghosts. The rhythmic hum of the tires against the asphalt should have been soothing, but Adam barely noticed. His hands gripped the steering wheel, his fingers flexing and tightening in an unconscious rhythm. The orphanage hall, the dim lights, the sound of children's voices, her face, lingered at the edges of his vision. Doris. The name meant nothing to him before tonight, but now it gnawed at the corners of his mind, unraveling years of carefully built detachment. She was just a child, just a girl in a choir. That's all she was. But she had Helen's eyes, the tilt of her head, the way she held herself, not quite timid, not quite bold, somewhere between presence and absence. And that resemblance, it was impossible, wasn't it? The light ahead turned red, but Adam barely noticed until the car in front of him stopped. He slammed the brakes, his heart lurching into his throat. The sudden jolt snapped him out of his thoughts. He exhaled through his nose, tightening his grip on the wheel as if grounding himself. He couldn't let himself get carried away. Not again. Still, as the car idled at the intersection, the past began to slip through the cracks, creeping in like a tide he couldn't hold back. Helen's laughter was bright in his ears, clear despite the distance of time. The scent of salt water, the rhythmic crash of waves, the golden haze of late afternoon light spilling across the sand. It was all so vivid. Anne, still barely steady on her feet, giggled as the water lapped at her tiny legs. Helen knelt beside her, her hands outstretched in case she stumbled, but there was no fear in her movements, only warmth, only love. "She's fearless," Helen had murmured, brushing damp curls from Anne's forehead as the child shrieked with laughter. "Like her mother," Adam had said, watching them, chest swelling with something he hadn't been able to name then, something close to awe. The memory twisted, shifting. The golden light darkened. The warmth drained away. The hotel room. His suitcase, still half-packed, was standing by the door, the phone vibrating across the wooden desk, Helen's name lighting up the screen. A missed call. And then another. He had been in a meeting. He had told himself he'd call back in 10 minutes. By the time he did, the line had already gone silent. The next call wasn't from her. He remembered his breath catching, the unnatural stillness of the air around him as a stranger's voice, cold, professional, shattered his world. "Mr. Evans, I'm calling regarding your wife, Helen Evans. There's been an accident." Then, the rush. The flight home that felt too long and too short all at once. The sharp scent of disinfectant in the small coastal station where they had taken her body. The way the officer's expression had shifted, just slightly, when he asked about Anne. "We haven't found her." "What do you mean you haven't found her?" Adam's voice had been hoarse, almost unrecognizable. "We're still searching." The search lasted weeks. The Coast Guard combed the shoreline, volunteers waded through marshes, and helicopters hovered over the restless water. But nothing. No footprints in the sand. No remnants of the small blue dress she had been wearing that day. And after a month, after hope had turned into something unspoken, something neither dead nor alive, they gave him a death certificate. Nobody. No answers. Just a name etched in ink, sealing the weight of a truth he never wanted to carry. Now, 10 years later, a girl with Helen's face had looked at him from across a crowded hall, and his world was tilting off its axis again. Adam turned onto his street, pulling into the driveway with more force than necessary. The engine hummed in the silence as he sat there, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping him tethered to the present. Doris can't be Anne. He repeated it like a mantra, forcing himself to breathe. It wasn't possible. There was no logical explanation. But then, how could he explain that feeling in his chest? That sharp, unrelenting tug in his gut, the way his mind wouldn't let go, the way the air in the orphanage had suddenly felt too thin the moment he saw her. His fingers moved absently to the glove compartment. The latch clicked open, and his hand brushed against the cold surface of a small framed photograph. He pulled it out slowly, hesitating before bringing it into the dim glow of the dashboard lights. Helen, caught mid-laugh, her eyes crinkling at the corners, and Anne, tiny and bright, her chubby fingers reaching for the camera, frozen in time. His thumb brushed over their faces. It was ridiculous, delusional even, but something inside him whispered otherwise, and Adam had never been able to ignore that voice. The office smelled of fresh coffee and polished wood, a controlled space of order and efficiency. Sunlight cut through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows over the polished conference table. The city skyline stretched beyond the glass, a maze of towering buildings and endless movement. A world Adam had built, brick by calculated brick, in an attempt to fill the void. But today, he was failing. Numbers blurred on the reports in front of him. The low hum of his assistant's voice, precise and professional, was nothing more than white noise in the background. He caught snippets. Acquisition finalized. Board approval pending. Meeting rescheduled to Friday. But none of it registered. His mind was elsewhere, circling back to a quiet orphanage hall, the sound of children's voices, and the unmistakable pull in his chest when he saw her. Doris. For years, he had attended charity events, met hundreds of children through the foundations he supported. He had shaken hands, signed checks, offered words of encouragement to bright-eyed kids who clung to the idea of a better future. But never, not once, had he noticed a child the way he noticed Doris. The realization unsettled him. "Mr. Evans." Adam blinked, refocusing. His assistant, Claire, stood near his desk, waiting for an answer. "Sorry, what was that?" His voice was steady, practiced, but Claire's sharp eyes flickered with something like suspicion. "You asked me to brief you on the new project team." "Right." He exhaled, rubbing a hand along his jaw. "Email me the details. I'll look at it later." She hesitated, as if considering whether to push, but then nodded. Understood. The moment the door clicked shut behind her, Adam leaned back, closing his eyes. He had to shake this. He had spent a decade moving forward, refusing to let himself sink into the past. This wasn't rational. It wasn't productive. And yet, it didn't feel like something he could ignore. When he left the office, the sun was still shining on the golden ground. Adam rarely left this early. His usual routine was to go home, pour himself a drink, and lose himself in work. Instead, he found himself driving home with a different intention. Upstairs, he unbuttoned his starched dress shirt, swapping it for something more understated. A dark sweater, jeans, and a pair of worn-in boots that hadn't seen much use in years. When he caught his reflection in the mirror, it was strange how different he looked. Not quite the billionaire executive. Not quite the man he used to be either. By the time he was back in the car, his hands on the wheel, he knew exactly where he was going. The orphanage sat on the edge of the city, nestled between quiet streets and older buildings that had been standing long before Adam had built his empire. He parked outside, lingering in the driver's seat for a moment longer than necessary. Inside, the halls were quieter than the previous night. No choir rehearsals, no bustling event coordinators, just the occasional distant sound of laughter, the murmur of footsteps down the corridor. He found Sandra near the reception desk, her sharp eyes assessing him with mild curiosity. "Mr. Evans," she greeted. "This is a surprise." "I wanted to make another donation," he said smoothly. She lifted a brow, unimpressed. Most people handle that through email. Adam offered a polite smile, but said nothing. Sandra watched him for a beat, then exhaled. "She's outside," she said, not elaborating. For a brief moment, he considered feigning confusion, pretending he didn't know exactly who she meant. But there was no point. Instead, he nodded his thanks and made his way through the side entrance toward the small courtyard. Doris sat on a wooden bench near the garden, a sketchbook balanced on her lap. Her hair was pulled into a loose ponytail, strands escaping around her face as she focused on the page. She didn't notice him at first. Adam hesitated, watching. Her pencil moved effortlessly, delicate strokes filling in shadows and depth. The image was unfinished but unmistakable. The ocean, waves curling toward an unseen shore. Something in his chest tightened. Helen had drawn like that, the same careful precision, the same way she seemed to disappear into the act itself, lost in a world only she could see. "You're good," Adam said finally, keeping his voice even. Doris startled slightly, glancing up. She looked at him, not wary, not particularly interested, just observing. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice quiet but clear. He stepped closer, tilting his head toward the drawing. "The ocean?" Doris nodded. "I like how it moves. It never really stops." Helen had said the same thing once. His throat went dry, but he forced himself to keep his expression neutral. "Do you draw often?" "Sometimes." She shrugged. "Mostly when it's quiet." There was something about her tone. Factual, without embellishment. She wasn't trying to fill the silence with unnecessary words. Adam glanced at the page again, the way she shaded the water, dark where the waves curled, lighter where the foam might be. It was natural, instinctive. Helen had taught Anne to hold a pencil before she could walk, had traced her tiny fingers over sketchbooks, whispering about color and shape, even before she was old enough to understand. A thought slipped in before he could stop it. If Anne had lived, would she have drawn like this? He swallowed against the weight in his chest. "Doris," Sandra's voice cut in from the doorway, breaking the moment. "It's getting late. You should come inside soon." Doris nodded, but didn't move immediately. Instead, she looked at Adam again, as if assessing him. Then, with quiet finality, she closed her sketchbook and stood. "Bye," she said, simple and unassuming, before turning toward the building. Adam exhaled slowly, watching her go. Sandra stepped beside him, arms crossed. She doesn't talk much to visitors. Adam glanced at her. "And yet, she answered me." Sandra's lips quirked, something knowing in her gaze. "She did." The unspoken question lingered between them, heavy in the air. Adam had spent years closing doors on the past, locking grief behind them. But for the first time in a decade, he wasn't sure he wanted to walk away. The days blurred into each other, but Adam found himself returning to the orphanage with a frequency that unsettled him. It wasn't planned, nor was it something he could fully explain, to himself or to Sandra. He was just drawn there. Each visit carried a strange sense of inevitability, like a path he had unknowingly started walking and could no longer turn back from. Doris was always in the courtyard when he arrived. Sometimes she sketched, sometimes she sat with a book, legs tucked under her as she read with quiet focus. She never looked surprised to see him, but neither did she seem particularly expectant. Their conversations remained brief, yet comfortable, as if neither of them needed to force anything. She was unlike any child Adam had met in his years of charity work. Most kids in the system either clung desperately to hope or braced themselves against disappointment. But Doris, she simply existed. She never asked about adoption, never spoke of wanting a family. If she wondered why he kept coming back, she never voiced it. And Adam wasn't sure if he even wanted to know the answer himself. One afternoon, he found her sitting under the shade of an old elm tree, sketchbook in her lap. The sun dappled across the pages as she dragged the tip of her pencil over the paper in slow, deliberate strokes. Adam paused a few steps away, watching. She was drawing a house this time, not the ocean. It was simple but carefully detailed. A porch with a wooden railing, a garden winding along the edges of the page. It took him a moment to recognize it. It was his house. Something cold and sharp lodged itself in his chest. Doris seemed to sense him then, lifting her head. She followed his gaze to her drawing, then shrugged. "I just remembered it," she murmured. Adam's breath caught. He had never once spoken to her about his home, never described it, never so much as mentioned where he lived. Before he could say anything, she shifted, rolling up the sleeve of her sweater absently. The movement was small, insignificant, until it wasn't. The scar. A pale, crescent-shaped mark curved just below the bend of her elbow. Adam felt the ground shift beneath him. It was the exact shape, the exact placement. A fragmented memory surfaced, unbidden and urgent, the way Anne had toddled through the garden all those years ago, giggling as she took uncertain steps toward him. The way she had fallen, her tiny arm catching against the low branch of a bush, leaving behind a thin, curved wound. He had been the one to hold her afterward, pressing a damp cloth to her skin, whispering apologies as she hiccuped between tears. And now, 10 years later, here it was. His breath left him in an uneven exhale. Doris didn't notice his reaction. Or maybe she did, but chose not to acknowledge it. She glanced at her arm with mild indifference. "It's always been there," she said, as if it were nothing. But it wasn't nothing. His mind raced through the possibilities. Coincidence, fabrication, delusion. But none of them held weight against the reality in front of him. Still, he forced his voice to remain steady. "How did you get it?" Doris only shrugged. "I don't know." The world felt too loud, too bright all of a sudden, but Adam forced himself to keep standing. He told himself to be rational, to breathe, and then the final blow. She lifted her hand to scratch at her collarbone, and the thin silver chain around her neck slipped into view. Adam stilled. Dangling from the chain was a small fish-shaped pendant. His stomach lurched. It was impossible. He had designed that pendant himself for Anne's first birthday. He had chosen the shape because Helen had always said she wanted Anne to be like the ocean, free, uncontained, ever moving. It had been custom-made. There was only one in existence. His hand moved before he could stop it. He reached forward, his fingers brushing against the pendant, his own breath uneven. Doris flinched at the contact, but didn't pull away immediately. "Where did you get this?" His voice came out rough, barely above a whisper. She frowned slightly. "I've always had it." Adam's fingers tightened around the pendant as if grounding himself. His vision blurred at the edges. Number. No, no, no. Everything inside him warred against logic, against reason, against the unbearable, inescapable truth that was beginning to take shape. The scar, the pendant, the way she drew, the way she spoke about water, the way she existed in the world with quiet detachment, as if she had once belonged to something, someone, but had forgotten. His own heartbeat echoed in his ears. Doris pulled back then, shifting uncomfortably. "Why do you care?" she asked, cautious now. Adam opened his mouth, but nothing came out. "Because you're mine. Because you were never supposed to be here, in this place, in this life. Because I buried an empty casket, thinking you were gone forever." He released the pendant, stepping back as if burned. Doris studied him, eyes sharp, unreadable. Then, without another word, she closed her sketchbook, stood up, and walked toward the orphanage. Adam stayed behind, rooted to the spot, the weight of the pendant still pressing into his palm as if it had left an imprint. It wasn't a delusion. It wasn't coincidence. and it sure as hell wasn't nothing. The office smelled of stale coffee and papers left out too long, but Adam barely noticed. He had spent the last hour pacing, his mind an unrelenting storm of questions without answers. His hands itched to act, to do something, but he was trapped in the uncertainty of it all. Doris. The name had once been nothing more than another child in the system, another orphan with no past to cling to. But now it was a name that burned into him, searing, relentless, inescapable. The scar, the pendant, the way she moved, spoke, and existed, it was all too much, too familiar. But he needed more than just a gut feeling. He needed proof, and there was only one place he could start. He strode through the orphanage doors without pausing, his presence a sharp contrast to the usual gentle movements of visitors who came with soft voices and warm smiles. He wasn't here for pleasantries. He needed answers. Sandra looked up from her desk, her expression shifting to something wary the moment she saw his face. She had known something was coming. Maybe not this, but something. "Adam," she greeted carefully, setting aside the stack of files she had been reviewing. "You're back." He exhaled sharply. "I need information on Susan, now." Sandra didn't react immediately. Instead, she studied him, searching for something in his face. "Why?" she asked finally. Adam ran a hand over his jaw, feeling the tension coiled in his muscles. "I need to know where she is. I need to talk to her. She hasn't been involved in Doris's life since she dropped her off here. And that doesn't bother you." His voice was sharper than he intended, but he didn't care. A woman hands over a baby and vanishes, and no one thinks to look for her. Sandra's gaze didn't waver. "We did look," she said evenly, "but there was no last name, no address on record, just a note saying the child had no family. No one ever came asking about her. The system did what it had to do." Adam clenched his fists, his frustration mounting. There has to be something. An old file, a record, anything. Sandra sighed, standing up. "Follow me." She led him to her office, a space cluttered with neatly stacked papers, donation ledgers, and an old filing cabinet with faded labels. She pulled open a drawer and flipped through folders before retrieving a single, yellowing sheet of paper. "This is all we have." She handed it to him. Adam scanned the page. No last name, no identification, just a first name, Susan, and a single sentence scrawled at the bottom. "She has no one else. Please take care of her." His grip on the paper tightened. It wasn't enough. "That's it?" His voice was tight. Sandra leaned against the desk, arms crossed. "That's it." Adam inhaled sharply, forcing himself to think. Think. "I'll find her myself," he muttered, more to himself than to her. Sandra studied him carefully. "And if you do," he met her gaze, "then I'll get my answers." The investigator Adam hired was efficient, discreet, and worth every dollar. He had been on retainer for years, but never for something like this. This wasn't a business competitor, a market lead, or a risk assessment. This was personal. "I need everything you can find on a woman named Susan," Adam had said over the phone that night. "She brought a child to St. Mary's Orphanage 9 years ago and disappeared. No last name, no records, just a first name, Susan." "That's not much to go on," the investigator admitted. "Start with the orphanage's records. Any woman named Susan who lived near that area a decade ago. Anyone connected to the foster care system, social services, or even hospitals. Cross-check with women who had ties to coastal areas." The investigator had paused, clearly catching something in Adam's tone. "You think this child, Doris, is someone from your past?" Adam's grip on the phone tightened. Just find her. In the days that followed, he returned to the orphanage more frequently than before. Part of it was restlessness. The other part, he couldn't stay away. Doris remained an enigma, but one he felt himself pulled toward with an almost unbearable force. She didn't ask why he was there so often, didn't question his presence. If anything, she treated it with the same quiet acceptance she treated everything else. One evening, as they sat on the steps of the orphanage's back garden, she glanced up at him, tilting her head slightly. "You're different from the others," she said simply. Adam raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "You don't try to make me want something." He frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" She shifted, pulling her knees to her chest. "Most people who come here, they want you to hope. They want you to want a family. I think it makes them feel better about leaving." She traced a line in the dirt with her finger. "But I don't really remember what it's like to have one. So it doesn't feel real." Adam's throat tightened. She wasn't saying it with sadness. She wasn't even saying it to evoke sympathy. It was just a fact to her. "You've never wanted to be adopted?" he asked carefully. Doris shrugged. "It's hard to want something you don't remember." Adam exhaled slowly. "And if you could remember?" She considered that for a moment. "Then I guess I'd know what I lost." The words hit him harder than they should have. She didn't know how much she meant to him. Not yet. But she would, because he wasn't leaving without answers. And he sure as hell wasn't leaving without her. "While you're here, what's the weather like where you live? Leave your thoughts in the comments below." The sun blared into the horizon as Adam drove down the narrow, winding road, the hum of his engine the only sound breaking the stillness of the countryside. The investigator had called earlier that morning. They had found her. Susan. A name he had repeated to himself over and over, searching for some kind of familiarity. But there was none. She was a stranger to him, a missing link in a puzzle he wasn't sure he was ready to solve. The small house came into view, tucked behind a worn wooden fence with patches of paint peeling away from years of coastal air erosion. It was humble, modest, a place built not for luxury, but for survival. Adam parked near the edge of the dirt path, inhaling sharply before stepping out. The air carried the scent of salt water, and somewhere in the distance he could hear the rhythmic crashing of waves against the shore. His chest tightened. This place felt like the past. He approached the front door, knocking twice. A moment passed before he heard slow, careful footsteps. The door creaked open, revealing a woman with silver-streaked hair and deep lines carved into her sun-weathered face. Her blue eyes studied him with quiet caution, a life's worth of guarded experience in them. "You must be Adam Evans. I heard the detective mention it," she said, voice rough but not unkind. Adam swallowed, nodding. "And you must be Susan." A pause. Then she exhaled. "Susan Wheeler, I knew this day would come." She stepped aside, motioning him in. The inside of the house was as modest as the exterior, wooden floors softened by old rugs, a small table with two mismatched chairs, walls lined with photographs that seemed to hold more stories than the woman herself. There was something lived in about it, something honest. She gestured toward the table. "Sit. I'll make tea." Adam remained standing. "I just need answers." Susan glanced at him, then nodded knowingly. "I suppose you do." She moved slowly as she poured water into a kettle, her hands steady despite the weight of the conversation to come. "I don't know who you were expecting me to be, Mr. Evans," she began, "but I am not the villain of this story." Adam tensed. "Tell me about Doris." Susan set the kettle on the stove and turned, leaning against the counter. Her eyes softened, and for the first time there was something almost sad in them. "It was a storm," she said simply. "A bad one, the kind that makes the ocean angry." Adam clenched his jaw. "I found her the morning after. I used to be a coastal fisherman, crabbing and clamming mostly. That early morning was no different." Susan continued. "She washed up on the beach, half buried in the sand. She was small, too small, barely breathing, skin cold as the tide that left her behind. His stomach twisted, nausea creeping into his throat. Susan sighed, rubbing a hand over her face. I didn't know where she came from. No one did. No boats had capsized, and there were no reports of missing children from the village. Just nothing. She shook her head. I took her in because I thought I could care for her. I tried. I really did. But I was old, my husband had passed, and I had no way of giving a baby the life she deserved. So you left her at the orphanage? Susan nodded. I thought it was the right thing. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But she needed more than what I could give. Adam's breath was unsteady. He looked down at his hands, feeling the weight of the moment pressing into his chest. She hadn't been abandoned. She had been lost. And then she had been saved. She was never meant to be there, he murmured. Susan studied him. No, she wasn't. Silence stretched between them. Adam clenched his fists, trying to keep his emotions at bay. She doesn't remember anything, does she? He finally asked. Susan shook her head. Not a thing. She was too young. Adam exhaled slowly, pressing his fingers against his temple. All these years, he had believed Anne was gone, that she had drowned, that the ocean had swallowed her whole, taking everything with it. He had grieved over an empty grave, spent nights imagining the horror of her last moments, wondering if she had been afraid, if she had called for him. And all this time, she had been here, alive. Doris, Anne, had been lost, but she had survived. He swallowed hard, his throat tight. Thank you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Susan gave him a long look, then nodded once. She's a good girl, you know. Strong. Quiet, but strong. Adam's lips parted, but he couldn't bring himself to say anything. He reached into his coat pocket, pulling out an envelope thick with crisp bills. He set it on the table before she could protest. Susan frowned. I don't need... It's not for you, Adam cut in, his voice firmer now. It's for what you did, for keeping her safe, for making sure she lived long enough to be found. She stared at him for a long moment, then nodded, placing her hand gently over the envelope without another word. Adam turned to leave, but as he reached the door, she called after him. You'll tell her, won't you? He stopped, but didn't turn around. You'll tell her, won't you? He stopped, but didn't turn around. You'll tell her who she really is? A beat of silence. Then, his fingers tightened around the doorknob. Yes. And with that, he stepped out into the cool evening air, the scent of salt water thick in his lungs. But for the first time in years, it didn't suffocate him. It felt like breathing. The sky was heavy with the soft hues of an approaching dusk as Adam pulled into the orphanage's gravel driveway. The scent of freshly turned earth lingered in the air, mingling with the distant hum of children's laughter from somewhere inside. But for once, Adam wasn't focused on the surroundings, nor the weight of the past that clung to this place. His heart was heavy, yet hopeful. It had been 10 years since he lost Anne, 10 years of grief, guilt, and quiet suffering, and now she was here, alive, breathing. A child who had no idea that the man who had been watching over her wasn't just another benefactor, he was her father. Sandra was waiting for him at the entrance, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. She had always been perceptive, and tonight was no exception. You found Susan, she stated, not asked. Adam exhaled. I did. And? His throat tightened. It's her. Sandra nodded as if she had already known, her gaze flickering toward the courtyard. She deserves to know the truth, Adam. I know. His voice was hoarse, but steady. Sandra hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside. She's in the garden. Adam made his way through the familiar hallways, past the rooms filled with quiet murmurs of bedtime stories and the occasional creak of an old floorboard. The further he walked, the more he felt the weight of what he was about to do press against his chest. Would she believe him? Would she even want to believe him? The soft rustling of leaves met him as he stepped outside. The garden was bathed in the gentle glow of the fading sun, its light casting long golden shadows over the stone pathways. And there, sitting cross-legged beneath the old elm tree, was Doris. She didn't look up immediately. Her fingers moved absently against the pages of her sketchbook, her pencil hovering in hesitation, as if lost in thought. Adam hesitated, then took a slow step forward. Doris. She glanced up at him, her expression neutral, but her eyes held curiosity. You came back. Adam swallowed. I needed to talk to you. She studied him for a moment before closing her sketchbook, setting it aside. You look different. How so? You look like you have something you don't want to say. A faint, humorless smile ghosted across his lips. She was perceptive, just like Helen. You're right, Adam admitted. His hands felt cold, but he forced himself to sit beside her on the stone bench. The space between them felt fragile, like glass waiting to shatter. Doris tilted her head slightly. So, say it. Adam inhaled deeply. I need to tell you a story. She didn't speak, but she didn't look away either. A long time ago, there was a man who had a wife he loved more than anything, and together they had a daughter, his whole world. His voice was steady, but his fingers curled against his knee. One day, the man went away for work, just for a little while, and while he was gone, something terrible happened. His wife and daughter went to the ocean, but a storm came. The air between them shifted. Doris's fingers tightened slightly against her lap, but she said nothing. The wife didn't survive, Adam continued, his voice softer now. And the little girl, she was lost, swept away. He swallowed, the words cutting through his throat like glass. For 10 years, the man thought his daughter had died that day, but she hadn't. Silence stretched between them. The only sound was the distant whisper of wind through the trees. Doris's lips parted slightly, her eyes searching his face. Why are you telling me this? Adam turned toward her fully, his gaze holding hers with quiet intensity. This was the moment. Because, Doris. His voice wavered, but he didn't look away. You are that little girl. Doris froze. She didn't blink, didn't breathe. It was as if the air had been stolen from her lungs, leaving only wide, uncomprehending eyes staring back at him. Adam swallowed. Your real name is Anne. His hands trembled, but he kept his voice steady. And I'm your father. The words hung there, suspended between them, fragile and impossible. Doris's breath hitched, her hands clenched against her lap, fingers curling into the fabric of her sweater. No, she whispered. But it wasn't a protest, it was shock. Adam didn't move. He didn't push. He just watched her, letting it sink in. You're lying, she said, but her voice trembled. I'm not. You're wrong. I wish I were. Doris's breathing turned uneven, her shoulders rising and falling too quickly. That doesn't make sense. I don't remember. I've always been... Her voice broke. Adam's heart clenched as he saw it happen. The realization, the fear, the overwhelming weight of truth crashing down on her. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. You're my... Her voice cracked. Adam reached out slowly, carefully, afraid she might recoil. I never stopped looking for you, he whispered. I never stopped hoping. For a moment she stayed frozen. Then, with a sudden, desperate movement, she lurched forward, throwing herself into his chest, her small frame shaking as the first choked sob broke free. Adam's arms wrapped around her instinctively, tightly, protectively, like he was afraid she might disappear again. And for the first time in 10 years, he held his daughter. His lost, broken, beautiful daughter. Doris's fingers clutched at his sweater, her entire body trembling with the force of everything crashing over her. "I don't remember," she whispered, voice muffled against him. "It's okay," Adam murmured, his voice thick. He pressed his lips against her hair, closing his eyes as tears finally escaped his own. "You don't have to remember." She gasped against him, her small hands fisting into the fabric of his shirt like she was afraid to let go. "You're my dad." Adam held her closer. "Yes," he whispered. A sob racked through her. "I thought I didn't have one." "You always did." His voice broke. "You always did." The garden blurred around them, the world beyond this moment insignificant. It didn't matter where they were, how many years had passed, or how many words had been lost to time. She was his. And this time, he wasn't letting go. The morning was crisp and quiet, as Doris stood by the orphanage gates, a small duffel bag slung over her shoulder. The weight of the moment pressed down on her, heavier than she had expected. Around her, familiar faces, Sandra, the staff, the other children, watched in silent understanding. Some of the younger kids clung to her arms, their small hands gripping her sweater as if holding on to the last threads of shared memories. Adam stood a few feet away, waiting. Doris exhaled, trying to keep her emotions contained. She had spent almost her entire life within these walls, not knowing where she truly belonged. Now, she was leaving. It was what she had always imagined, what every kid at the orphanage dreamed of. But it didn't feel like she had expected it to. It wasn't a fresh start, wasn't a clean slate. It was a return to something she had lost without ever knowing she had lost it. "Do you have everything?" Sandra asked gently. Doris nodded, gripping the strap of her bag. "Yeah." Sandra smiled, but there was something sad beneath it. She reached out, brushing a loose strand of hair behind Doris's ear like she had done 1,000 times before. "You know you can always come back and visit." "I know." One of the younger girls, barely 6, tugged at her sleeve, sniffling. "You'll forget us." Doris's chest tightened. She crouched down, squeezing the little girl's hand. "I won't." "You promise?" "I promise." There was another pause, the kind where words felt inadequate. Sandra finally stepped back, giving Adam a nod. He stepped forward, his presence calm but solid, grounding. He hadn't pushed her to leave faster. He hadn't rushed her goodbyes. Still, when she turned toward him, she felt a sudden hesitation. His house wasn't just a house. It was his house. A world that once belonged to a family she couldn't remember, to a mother she had lost before she could know her. She wasn't afraid, exactly, but she wasn't sure what she was supposed to feel. Adam seemed to sense it. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Are you ready?" Doris hesitated, then nodded. And with that, she stepped into the car, leaving behind the only home she had ever known. The mansion was too big. Doris had expected it to be grand, expected it to feel different from the orphanage, but not like this. The ceilings stretched too high, and the furniture looked like something from a magazine, pristine and untouched. Even the air smelled expensive, leather, polished wood, something faintly citrusy. Adam led her inside, his movements careful, like he didn't want to overwhelm her. "Your room is upstairs," he said. "You can decorate it however you want." Doris only nodded. She followed him through the halls, her footsteps soft against the polished floors. There were paintings lining the walls, landscapes, abstract pieces, nothing too personal. But then, near the staircase, she stopped. A large canvas hung there, and unlike the others, this one wasn't impersonal. It wasn't something bought from a gallery. It was hand-painted. Soft strokes, careful blending of colors. It was Helen's work. Doris didn't know how she knew that, but she did. Her fingers twitched at her side, an almost unconscious reaction. She had drawn like this before, had sketched and shaded with the same kind of focus. Her throat felt tight. Adam had stopped beside her, watching. His expression was unreadable. "She painted that," he said quietly. Doris didn't need to ask who she was. She swallowed, her fingers brushing the hem of her sweater. She liked painting. She loved it, Adam murmured. His voice had that distant quality again, like he was caught somewhere between past and present. "She wanted to teach you one day." Doris's chest tightened. She didn't remember. She wanted to remember, but she didn't. Instead of responding, she turned away and kept walking. The transition wasn't easy. The house was too quiet. At the orphanage, there was always noise. Kids running through the halls, staff calling out reminders, someone laughing, someone crying. Here, it was just silence. Adam tried. She knew he did. He had started working from home more, had meals with her instead of leaving plates in the fridge, and asked her about her day even when she only answered in nods. But some things weren't as easy to fix. Calling him Dad felt strange. She wasn't sure if it was because she had spent too long without a family, or because it made everything feel too real. Adam never forced it. He never asked her to say it, never corrected her when she just said his name. But sometimes, in the quiet moments, when he ruffled her hair absent-mindedly, when he adjusted the heater in her room because he thought it might be too cold, she almost said it. She just couldn't. Not yet. One afternoon, she wandered into a smaller sitting room near the back of the house, drawn by the smell of something faintly familiar. Paint. Canvases were stacked near the windows, some blank, some covered in sketches and unfinished work. Brushes rested in jars, dried paint crusting the bristles. Adam was there, standing by an easel, looking at something on the table. He turned when he heard her. "I was going to clear some of this out," he said, "but I thought you might want to see it first." Doris stepped closer. The papers on the table were filled with half-drawn sketches, most of them of the ocean. Her fingers traced the edge of a sketch. "These are Mom's." Adam nodded. "Some of them." She stared at the page, at the careful strokes of charcoal. Then, without thinking, she reached for a pencil. Adam didn't say anything. He just watched as she sat at the table, her fingers moving hesitantly over the page. She didn't know why she was doing it. Maybe it was muscle memory. Maybe it was something deeper. But as the lines took shape, waves curling, the sky meeting the horizon, it felt right. Adam exhaled softly, almost like he was afraid to break the moment. "You don't have to remember," he said. "But you're still you, Anne." Her hand trembled slightly against the paper. Anne. She still wasn't sure who she was. But maybe, just maybe, she was starting to find out. The night was deep, the city silent except for the occasional hum of passing cars in the distance. Adam sat at his desk, fingers curled around a glass of whiskey, untouched. The soft glow of his desk lamp cast long shadows against the dark mahogany. His laptop screen was open, displaying work he had no interest in finishing. His phone rang. The sound cut through the stillness, sharp and intrusive. Adam straightened, setting the glass down as he reached for the device. The caller ID flashed a familiar name. The investigator. His stomach tightened. He had been expecting this call, but now that it had come, he wasn't sure he was ready. He answered. "Yeah?" There was a pause. Then, the investigator's voice, calm, but edged with something darker. "We found something." Adam inhaled slowly. "Go on." A rustling of papers on the other end. Then, "It wasn't an accident." Silence. Adam's fingers clenched. "Please explain." "The boat Helen took out that day, the one that capsized in the storm. It was tampered with. The fuel lines were cut, and the emergency raft was slashed before she ever took it into the water." His grip tightened around the phone, his heartbeat slow but heavy. "You're sure?" "We got access to an old maintenance report. The boat was checked a week prior. fully functional. But when it was recovered, there were clear signs of interference. Someone wanted that boat to fail. Adam's breath came out unsteady. The weight in his chest turned to something colder, sharper. Who? His voice was quiet, deadly. There was another pause. Then, the name that would shatter everything. Vincent Bryant. A slow, deafening silence stretched between them. Adam closed his eyes, gripping the edge of the desk. Vincent. It had been years since he had last heard that name, but the memories resurfaced in a flood of cold, burning rage. A business rival, a man with a reputation for playing dirty, for holding grudges, a man Adam had once crushed in a deal that had cost Vincent everything. But this was beyond business. He did this, Adam murmured, more to himself than to the investigator. His jaw locked, the muscles in his neck tightening. He killed Helen. A pause. Then, and he tried to kill your daughter. Adam exhaled slowly, trying to rein in the fury surging through his veins. He had spent years believing he had lost them to chance, to fate's cruel hand. But it wasn't fate. It wasn't an accident. It was murder. And he had let him get away with it. The investigator spoke again. There's more. I looked into Vincent's financials. He disappeared for a while after the accident, but recently his name has been surfacing again. He's back in the country. Adam's grip on the phone tightened. Where? A brief hesitation. I'll send you the details. Adam nodded once. Good. He ended the call, setting the phone down with deliberate control. His reflection stared back at him from the darkened window, his expression unreadable. For 10 years, he had lived with the guilt of not being there, of believing he had lost his wife and daughter to the ocean's merciless pull. Now, he knew the truth, and he wasn't going to let Vincent Bryant walk away from this. Not again. The rain came down in a slow, steady rhythm, drumming against the windows of Adam's office as he stared at the file spread out before him. Vincent Bryant's name glared back at him in bold print, accompanied by a grainy surveillance image from a recent sighting. The investigator had been thorough. Too thorough. There were addresses, financial records, a timeline of Vincent's movements over the past decade. He had spent time overseas, keeping a low profile, but now he was back. And not just anywhere, in the same city. The bastard was walking free, living his life like he hadn't stolen Helen's, like he hadn't destroyed everything Adam had ever loved. Adam's fingers curled into fists, his jaw locking tight. This wasn't just business anymore, it was personal. A knock at the door broke his thoughts. He exhaled sharply, pushing the file shut before calling out, "Come in." The door creaked open, and Doris stepped inside. She hesitated for half a second before walking fully into the room, her small frame barely making a sound against the polished floor. "You're still awake," she said. Adam forced a smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "So are you." She shrugged, shifting on her feet before glancing at his desk. "You look angry." He hesitated. It was uncanny how she could see through him. She had Helen's quiet perceptiveness, the ability to sense emotions even when nothing was said aloud. Adam sighed, running a hand over his face. "It's complicated." Doris didn't move. She lingered by the door, her fingers tightening against the hem of her sweater. "It's about my mom, isn't it?" His breath caught. She had never referred to Helen that way before. My mom. It had always been detached. Helen was an idea, a story, something she wasn't sure she could claim as her own. But now, she was claiming her. Adam swallowed, nodding. "Yes." Doris exhaled slowly. Then, with careful steps, she walked toward the desk. "What happened?" Adam hesitated. He wanted to shield her from this, wanted to protect her from the darkness of what he had just uncovered. But she deserved the truth. So he told her. He told her about the investigators' findings, about the tampered boat, and about the man responsible. He didn't soften the details, but he chose his words carefully, watching her closely for any sign of distress. Doris listened. She didn't speak, didn't flinch, just sat there, absorbing everything. When he finished, silence stretched between them. The rain outside had softened to a faint drizzle, the room dim except for the glow of the desk lamp. Doris finally spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "What are you going to do?" Adam inhaled slowly. "I don't know yet." Her eyes flickered. "You're angry?" "Yes." "Are you going to hurt him?" The question made his chest tighten. Would he? A part of him wanted to. A part of him wanted to see Vincent broken, ruined, suffering, to make him pay for every single second of grief, every night spent believing Anne was dead, every year lost to mourning a crime he hadn't even known was committed. He could do it. He had the power, the resources. He could make Vincent disappear. But then, Doris. She was watching him, studying him, and for the first time, he wasn't just a grieving husband, wasn't just a man with revenge in his blood, he was a father. His hands curled into fists before slowly unfurling. He let out a slow breath, forcing himself to steady. "No," he said finally. "I won't hurt him." Doris didn't seem convinced. "Why not?" Adam exhaled. "Because revenge won't change anything." Her brow furrowed slightly, her fingers tapping lightly against her knee. "It won't bring Mom back." "No," Adam said softly. "It won't." Doris was quiet for a moment. Then, almost hesitantly, she murmured, "What will happen to him?" Adam leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "I'll make sure he faces justice, the right way." Doris studied him, something unreadable flickering behind her eyes. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she asked, "Would she want that?" Adam stilled. She. Helen. His throat tightened. He hadn't thought about it in those terms. He had been consumed with his own grief, his own rage, his own need to make things right. But what would Helen have wanted? She had never been vengeful, never cruel. She had always believed in justice, in doing the right thing, even when it hurt. Adam swallowed past the lump in his throat. "Yes," he said finally. "I think she would." Doris nodded slowly, as if considering something. Then, after a long pause, she stood. "Okay." She turned to leave but hesitated at the door. Without looking back, she said, "Good night, Dad." Adam's breath caught. Dad. Not Adam. Not distant. Not uncertain. Dad. His eyes burned as he sat there in the dim glow of his office, his daughter's voice lingering in the space she had just left behind. He had spent years chasing ghosts, mourning what was stolen. But now he had something to fight for. Not for revenge. For her. The sky was an expanse of muted grey as Adam and Doris drove down the winding road toward the cemetery. The silence between them was not uncomfortable, but weighted. Each of them was lost in their own thoughts, the road stretching before them like a quiet reminder of where they had been and where they were going. In the back seat, a bouquet of lilies rested against a box of neatly folded letters. Adam had written them for years. Letters to Helen, words that never reached her. Today, he was bringing them home. Doris shifted beside him, her fingers curled against the fabric of her sweater. He could feel her glancing at him every so often, but she didn't speak. She didn't need to. When they arrived, the air was still. The wind rustled through the trees lining the hillside, carrying the faint scent of damp earth. The cemetery wasn't large, nor was it extravagant, just a quiet place where time moved gently. Helen's grave sat beneath an old oak tree, the stone simple yet beautiful. Adam had never wanted something grand for her. She had never been the type to seek attention. Instead, he had chosen something intimate, something true. He knelt first, setting the flowers against the headstone. Doris lingered beside him, her arms wrapped around herself. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Doris took a slow step forward. She stared at the grave, her lips pressing together as if searching for words. Finally, she inhaled shakily and whispered, "Mom." "I found Dad." Adam's breath hitched. Doris reached out hesitantly, brushing her fingers along the edge of the stone. "I don't remember you," she admitted softly. "But I think I'm starting to." Adam's chest tightened. She wasn't talking about memories. She was talking about something deeper, a connection, a sense of belonging. Doris knelt beside him, her small hands tracing the delicate engravings. Then, without a word, she reached for one of the letters in the box Adam had brought. She unfolded it carefully, her eyes scanning the words he had once written. Letters of grief, of longing, of love. For the first time in 10 years, he felt ready to share them. Doris glanced at him, uncertainty flickering in her gaze. "Do you think she'd be proud of me?" Adam's throat tightened. "She'd be proud of us," he corrected gently. A small, fragile smile tugged at her lips. She nodded, swallowing hard, before placing the letter at the base of the grave. They stayed there for a long time, long enough for the clouds to shift, for the wind to carry the scent of lilies through the air. Finally, when the sky began to darken, Doris reached out and took his hand. Adam stilled. It was instinctive, unthinking, a simple motion, but it meant everything. She chose to take his hand. She chose to trust him. As they walked back to the car, Adam glanced down at her, feeling something he hadn't felt in years: peace. The case against Vincent remained open. Justice would come, in time. But for now, Adam had what mattered most: his daughter, and he wasn't going to lose her again. If this film touches your heart, leave your mark with a like, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to explore more meaningful stories with us. And if you enjoyed this story, please share it with your friends on WhatsApp. And now, share your feelings with us and tell us your own stories. Every word you share is a building block that helps create our strong and enduring community. Together, we'll create a warm space where everyone can share and connect. Finally, don't miss the incredible stories coming your way soon. We're always here to bring you the best selections, full of deep values, yet entertaining. See you there.